My name's Will. I'm the lead pastor here at Powell Church. As you saw, we're walking through a series called What Kind of Church Is This? Where we've been sharing on our core values and our mission statement. We've been doing this following the first truths of the very first church in Acts chapter 2, because whatever kind of church we are and whatever kind of church we're gonna be, we want to make sure we're about the things that the church from the very beginning has always been about. As we've shared in this series thus far at Powell Church, our core values are Jesus at the center of everything. We is greater than me, and come as you are. We like to say Powell Church is a come as you are church, where we is greater than me, and Jesus is at the center of everything. That's who we are. That's who we want to be. So, if that's who we are, what do we do? Last week, we started talking about the first part of our mission statement, which is make disciples. We believe that Jesus looks at every single person and says, follow me. That you and I are invited not just to believe in him, but to be like him by the grace of God. That Jesus isn't just for forgiving my past or securing my future. But the good news is even better than that, because this Jesus is for our lives here, now, today. And the church, from the beginning, is here to extend that same invitation to the whole world. This morning, we want to share on the next part of our mission statement. We also want to walk through some of what took place in United Methodist world this week, because Powell Church is a United Methodist congregation, as you may have heard or read in the news. This past week, some of our theological language on human sexuality was updated at what we call General Conference. Maybe you're here this morning, or if you're watching later on YouTube or listening to our podcast, and whatever your percentage of agreement with new language or old language, or if all of it just seems confusing, you too might be asking yourself again, okay, well, like what kind of church is this? We believe that church is a good place to talk about meaningful things. So let's start that this morning by talking about something that is fairly meaningless. Think about your favorite commercial. It's kind of a weird idea anyway, right? That you would have a favorite commercial. We have entire technologies that have been developed to help us avoid them altogether, and yet somehow they still find their way through some kind of marriage of an annoyance and a necessary evil. Think about your favorite commercial. Because also, like, I don't know about you, but for me, when it comes to watching TV, I kind of miss them. Not during a live sporting event, but if I'm watching a program, if I'm watching a scripted program, the old school commercial break, the kind where you can run to the kitchen and the restroom and that sort of stuff. We have Hulu at our house, and we pay for something less than the top commercial free tier. And Hulu, instead of doing like the skippable in 8 seconds thing, which I think those are the most annoying, Hulu does the old school like 2.5 minute break in the middle of the show. And I kind of like it. I like being able to turn, my wife disagrees about this passionately, but I like being able to turn to her and say, what do you think's happening right now? And also, would you like a granola bar and that sort of thing? Think about your favorite commercial. Think about what makes you remember and why. Because it sounds trite, but I mean, commercials are really doing a powerful thing in human beings. I want you to believe something. And then I want you to act on it. I want you to invest in it. I want you to take something valuable of yours and give it to this thing. My favorite commercial of all time is a Super Bowl commercial, which is kind of its own category anyway. But this commercial is 6 years old now, and I still think about it all the time. This is my favorite commercial ever. Here, take a look. Now listen, I love that ad in spite of myself, because in our household, we work very hard to not purchase products that share any affiliation with the University of Alabama. And yet, I think about that ad all the time, that every ad, everything you see is really a Tide ad. Now, in the Bible, there's actually a story where they comment on the whiteness of Jesus' clothes. There is a story in the Gospels where we're given just a glimpse of who Jesus truly is. It's in Matthew and Luke as well. Here it is in Mark. This is Mark 9, verses 2 and 3. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his inner circle, with him and led them up a high mountain. They were all alone. There, Jesus was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. A few verses later, these three guys are going to hear the actual voice of God. The voice of God says 10 words. This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him. Let your eyes and your ears and your hearts believe. This Jesus is the one. This Jesus is at the center of everything. This is mountaintop stuff, literally and otherwise. Now, the New Testament calls what's happening to Jesus here transfiguration. And one thing is for sure, when you and I say we believe Jesus is calling us to be like him, we can't do that, right? No matter what kind of detergent you use. We can't do that. We can't do transfiguration. As you may be aware, you and I are not God. And that's good news. We can't do transfiguration. But the New Testament was originally written in Greek. The Greek word the New Testament uses for transfiguration is the Greek word metamorpho. It's where we get the English word metamorphosis from. You and I can't do transfiguration, but metamorpho also shows up 2 other times in the New Testament. And listen to what those passages say about you and me. One's in Romans 12. We use this passage a lot to talk about worship. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. For lack of it, be metamorphosed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. We talk about this passage often when it comes to worship. We talked about it when we said we are a come as you are church, that the invitation is bring yourself as a living sacrifice. Don't just when it comes to church and what kind of church this is and worship and all that, don't just bring your stuff. Bring your stuff to the yard sale, but don't just bring your stuff, right? Don't just bring your offering. Don't just bring your burdens. Don't just bring your blessings. You bring you as you are. Worship is don't just bring all those things. You bring you to God. And don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You and I, we can't do transfiguration, but we are invited to be part of transformation. Don't think that the way things are in this world is just the way it has to be. Be transformed into something more. Now, the other place metamorpho shows up is, in fact, a passage in the New Testament that looks back at the Old Testament and talks about how Moses once had his face as a tie-dad, that he was whiter in the face and people couldn't even look at him. But watch how this passage makes the contrast between what Moses was inviting people to do and what Jesus is inviting us to do now. This is 2 Corinthians 3, starting in verse 7. If the ministry that brought death engraved in letters on stone, so this is the law, this is the old. If the ministry that brought death engraved in letters on stone came with glory, so much glory that the Israelites couldn't look steadily at the face of Moses because of its glory, transitory though it was. If that old that brings death had glory, will not the ministry of the Spirit be even more glorious? If the ministry that brought condemnation was glorious, how much more glorious is the ministry that brings righteousness? Because what was glorious then has no glory now in comparison with the surpassing glory. If what was transitory came with glory, how much greater is the glory of that which now lasts? And if we believe this, if we have such a hope, we are indeed very bold. 3 verses later, it'll go on to say this in verse 15. Even to this day, when Moses is read, when the just the law, just the old is read, a veil covers their hearts. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now the Lord is the Spirit, capital S, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And all of us who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, all of us who contemplate the Lord's glory, that word contemplate in Greek can also be translated as reflect. So we don't just think about it, we are engaged with it in some way. All of us with unveiled faces who contemplate or reflect the Lord's glory, we are being transformed, metamorphosed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. As Tiana shared, we're redesigning our stage, so we accidentally created kind of a visual for this morning. Think about if it was the old, that in some way there wasn't full access, that you couldn't look directly at Moses in the face, that even the old thing, even it had glory, even it had power, even it had all of those things, but that glory has nothing on the surpassing glory of what we know now in Jesus. And the invitation is that you and I are being transformed. We can't do transfiguration. We're not God. We're not the light. But Paul invites us to believe that we can contemplate that light, as the Romans passage says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And Paul writes here that more than just contemplating the light, you and I can in some way reflect it. You and I can let it shine. And that in doing so, you and I are being transformed into his image, not just once and done, but ever increasing. It says, we are being transformed into his image. Let's talk about what his means there. You and I already carry around the image of God. Do you know why? Because you're a person. The first truth about human beings all the way back in Genesis is that you and I are created in the image of God. That's the first truth about you. That's been true about you longer than anything else has been true about you. You think about all the things that are true about you, all the things that make up your identity, all the things that other people try to put on you that you wish they wouldn't try to put on you, that they think makes up your identity. All of those things, and what has been true about you longer than any of those things, all the good things, all the things we don't want, all the mixed bag, all the DNA, all of that, longer than any of that's been true, is that you and I are created in the image of God. And here's the part we sometimes like less. That's true for everybody else too, right? Democrats and Republicans, Palestinians and Jews, everyone is created in the image of God. We already carry the image of God just by virtue of being a person. Being made in the image of God is not something we need to be transformed into. It's something we already are. The transformation taking place here, the his here, is we are being transformed into the image of Jesus, into the image of Christ. That we're called not just to believe in him, but called to be like him. And this too only God can do in us. But the invitation is to dare to believe that he is doing it in us. What's a church like this for? What's our mission statement? We believe in making disciples of Jesus Christ for the purpose of transformation. Our mission, we'll do the last part of this next week, but our mission is to make disciples for the purpose of transformation. Now, this mission statement isn't unique to us. It is, in fact, the mission of the United Methodist Church. And one of the questions this whole conversation asks is, what does transformation look like? Let me say, if you're looking for a deeper dive on the human sexuality stuff, we did a whole series on it last fall called Resurrection and Relationships, which you can find in our archives on YouTube and on our podcast. This week at General Conference, we sent around some information in our newsletter about this. The denomination essentially made its language on human sexuality neutral. Whereas before, the United Methodist Church had what we would call non-affirming language on the practice of homosexuality. The language wasn't changed from non-affirming to affirming. It was essentially removed or made neutral. So we don't have a separate set of things we say for heterosexuality or homosexuality. Some of that language is part of our social principles, which aren't church law. Some of that language does affect church law when it comes to weddings and ordination. Let me just say real quick from a practical policies and procedures standpoint, we, Powell Church, we don't seek to uphold anything or change anything without plenty of time and space for conversation, and we don't seek to do anything we can't do together. We believe church is a good place to talk about meaningful things. Our local Methodist bodies are gathering in the coming weeks and months. We'll learn more and always work to keep you informed. In that series last fall, we shared that Christians of good faith differ on biblical interpretation when it comes to human sexuality, but all seek a faithful witness that every person's sexuality is in need of grace. And that's the good news, is that grace is here. So this conversation asks of each one of us, what does a faithful witness look like for me? 6 years ago, my wife and I moved to a new church. Covington was 9 months old, so 3 of us, we moved to a new church. We moved from a church in Athens, Tennessee, where I was serving as an associate pastor, to be the lead pastor at a church in Pulaski, Virginia. Athens was and is Alex's hometown, as her home church. So we knew all these people. We had lots of friends there. We got to know all kinds of great people there. And 2 of the people we got to know at the church in Athens were a married lesbian couple. They were part of our church at the time. One of them was trying to figure out what God was calling her to do, if God was calling her to ministry, what that might look like. And we weren't best friends or anything like that. They were a little older than us. But we really enjoyed our conversations with them, and they were incredibly kind to us. When Covington was born, they made him this blanket that we ended up using in the photos we took at the hospital. So we were moving to the new church, and had a couple weeks off and all that stuff. And one of these women sent me a message and said, hey, we're actually going on vacation, coming right through where you're going to be, and it looks like we'll be in town when you start. Do you mind if we come to your new church on your first Sunday there? And I hesitated. For sure, we had this question, what kind of church is this? Like, we had that question about the new church because we didn't know. Will they be welcome? That sort of stuff. But we believe church is a place where you don't have to lie. Most of my hesitation was for me. What will people think about me? Is this the first impression I really want to make? Is it worth it? I've never told this story before or told them about the pause until yesterday when I messaged them to ask if I could tell this story, and frankly, because I'm a little embarrassed by it. And let me say, me struggling with those thoughts for a couple of moments, I am quite sure is a fraction of a shadow of the things any person who's gay has ever had to be anxious about before stepping foot in a church. But after a few longer moments than I would like, I just realized by the grace of God that if the question is, can I come to church with you? There's only ever one answer to that question. You know what happened? Nothing. They came, they were friendly, people were friendly to them. People thought it was cool to have someone from our last church there at the new church, and then they left, and no one ever said anything to me about it in the 4 years that we served there. That's in part because we quickly discovered that that church in Virginia looks a lot like this place on a smaller scale. Different kinds of people seeking the same good news. It was people who sought to love each other well because they believed they were each seeking to love Jesus each seeking a faithful witness. In fact, listen, if you think we have fun around here, in that church, 2 people in the church ran against each other for mayor. One sang in the choir, one sang in the praise band. And to my knowledge, both of those guys still worship in that church together today. And not only worship in that church together, but serve together. And whatever it's worth, you know what that church did? It worked. One small step at a time, it worked. And it grew, just like this one. It didn't grow because we put diversity, equity, inclusion in the center. That won't save us. And it won't truly free us either. And it didn't grow because we put Scripture alone in the center. That also won't truly save us and won't truly free us. Only Jesus can do that. Someone asked me, with all this going on, what are you going to preach this week? The only thing I have to offer you is Jesus Christ. Crucified, dead, and buried, not just risen, but alive, not just in us and through us. It has always only been Jesus. And I think it grew, and I think it grows now because all those different kinds of people, we were looking for him. Christians of good faith differ on interpretation when it comes to human sexuality, which means in some way we differ on what transformation looks like. But I also think we know it's never really our job to be the expert on transformation for someone else's life. I really hate it when someone tries to be the expert on transformation in my life, right? And I think when we do that, we can certainly find ourselves running the risk of trying to transform something that may not need to be. But more than that, we might also miss the ways that I can be transformed. Maybe it's in how we judge or what we're anxious about. With sexuality, what we pointed to in that series last fall is the same thing we would point to today. We don't build this on what we want to say no to, but what do we want to say yes to? Not just nakedness, but intimacy. Not just mutual submission, but self-sacrifice, covenant relationships, and oneness. Because in those things, we find who Jesus is for us and who he is inviting us to be. When it comes to transformation, people in this church and many others can tell you that they came seeking this kind of transformation, and God ended up working in and through them in ways and giving them new life in ways beyond what they ever imagined. I can tell you what has transformed and what is helping transform me now is a group of different people seeking to follow the same Jesus, who love each other best they're able, who encourage each other to love themselves well, and all of us loving God with everything we have today. Each of us seeking to believe that for the other person. And where we may not fully understand, or maybe we may not even fully understand ourselves, where Christians of good faith differ, but all seek a faithful witness. I just believe in telling people about Jesus, the one who is transforming me, and trusting that he's going to be at work in your life too, in the ways that are most meaningful, most beautiful, most true. We are called to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the purpose of transformation, because we can't do transfiguration. I can't snap my fingers and solve all United Methodist problems. Dadgummit, I wish I could. That would be amazing. I can't. And neither can you. I can't. We have people who work hard in this church every day that would love to snap our fingers and not need a food pantry or a clothes closet. But we can't do that. We can't do transfiguration. But we can and are invited to do this. We are invited to do transformation. And one day, I believe, one day it won't just be Peter, James, and John who get to see that close. They get to hear the voice of God. That one day all of this is being made new. Until then, what does transformation look like? What kind of church is this? So we close. How did it look for the first church? Here's Acts 2. Again, first truths of the first church. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, the breaking of bread and prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together. They had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God, having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. What does transformation look like? What's the phrase used most often in that first truth of the first church? Day by day. Transformation looks like day by day. You know what the good news about that is? If this Jesus now lives fully in each one of us through the Holy Spirit, then everywhere we go and everything we do and every breath we take is a tide ad, man. Everything we do. It's all Jesus. It all matters. It all counts. It's a privilege to be the pastor of this church and to have been part of communities in the past that helped transform me. It's a privilege to be alive and living in the kingdom of God, which is at hand no matter who votes for what, in Methodist world or United States world or whatever the case may be. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Jesus is the only thing we got. And thanks be to God, he's more than enough.